I love painting fruit and vegetables in watercolor. Here are all the supplies that I used and my line drawing. Just want to rub out some of the darker lines of the pencil, and also want to keep my highlights white, so I just want to quickly draw them in. I wet the paper, and we don't want any puddles, we just want a soft shine to the paper. This is what you want. This is the yellow ochre and nickel azo yellow and quinacridone gold deep with burnt sienna that I've got on my palette. I did not use the burnt sienna. I might have mixed a little bit in, but I found that the quinacridone gold deep is the perfect color for the onion. My first layer is very watery and also very light. We want the onion to stay translucent. We want to see all the layers through each layer that we put down on the paper. So my first layer is the yellow ochre mixed with a little bit of the nickel azo yellow. And I've put it down all over the painting. I'm now going to paint the top part of the onion. I mixed a little bit of the permanent sap green with a nickel azo yellow. I want to keep the colors very limited on my palette. For the top part of the onion, I use my Kum Memory number 5 point brush. This is permanent sap green mixed with a little bit of the azo yellow. Now I'm going to mix the yellow ochre with the quinacridone gold deep and a touch of paint grey. This is the darker section that we are going to focus on at the moment on this onion painting, and the paint is slightly thicker than before. So I'm slowly layering each layer of this onion, trying to keep the highlights on the left hand side of the onion as white as possible or as light as possible. And the paint is still a little bit thicker than the first layer that we put down. Take care not to paint over the highlighted sections of your onion. Try and keep it as light as possible, because that is what will make the onion, especially the highlight on the left hand side of your the onion, that is what will make the onion look 3D and create a beautiful shine on the onion. So I've mixed a little bit of the yellow ochre with the burnt sienna and the quinacridone gold deep. You're welcome to use the burnt sienna, it will also work perfectly for this painting. Each layer we paint already starts to create this beautiful form on the onion, and that is what will make this onion look 3D. We don't want an onion that just looks flat on the paper. We want it to look 3D, and that is why we already follow the beautiful form of this onion, because it will just look very, very flat if you don't follow the form of the onion. I used a very fine liner brush to create little lines on the onion that you can see on the reference photo. I just use a very thick consistency of the yellow ochre with the quinacridone gold deep. And then I just drew those tiny little lines in that you can see on the reference photo. I use a watery nickel azo yellow at the top of the onion there. And I mix between all of the colors on my palette. You'll notice that my watercolor palette is very dry at the moment. I wet my brush only and then I pick up some paint. You will notice that I still follow the form of the onion, and I slowly build layer after layer of watercolor paint on my painting. And I take the paint down just to a certain section and then I stop, because I want to create all of that detail that we can see on the onion reference photo. I leave a lot of highlighted sections in between each little line that I paint at the moment. I just take the paint down to a certain sections and I don't take it down fully to the bottom. We want to create different colors, different textures on the onion, and I pick up different colors all the time. So I just mix between all of the colors on my palette. I'm going to turn my paper around because I want to create the lines on this side of the onion. So now we're going to add detail. Still don't take it down to the bottom. I just leave a little section of the bottom of the painting open and the top part of the painting. And then I soften those hard lines. I'm now going to turn it back around. And you will see that that just creates this beautiful 3D effect on the onion. So now I pick up a little bit more of my paint grey with the quinacridone gold deep. Now I have a little bit more water on my paint and my brush as well, but the paint is still thicker than the first layer that we put down on the painting. I'm glazing my onion now. I have my brush that is very wet, and I just picked up a little bit of the color on my palette and I put it all over the onion. That helps to soften all of those lines that we just put down earlier to create all of those little detail that we can see on the onion. This mixture is the nickel azo yellow. I want to paint this darker section first with a lighter layer of yellow underneath so that this yellow can shine through. I mix some Payne's grey with my mixture. I want to create that shadow that I can see on the reference photo. I still use a light color, and my brush has a very nice point so I can get all the detail that I can see on the reference photo on that section of my onion. While we wait for that to dry, I'm going to move on to a different part of my onion. The mixture is still very watery. That little part of the skin of the onion sort of falls over and creates a beautiful detail that we can see on the reference photo. So I'm trying to create that exactly, but I'm not going to worry if it's not picture perfect. I just want to paint what I can see and what I can make out on the painting. So I'm focusing on my tonal values at the moment. You will see that certain parts are a little bit darker than other parts. At the same time, I'm focusing on all of the lines that we can see on the reference photo. So the consistency is slightly thicker than before. And then I just move the pigment around or the paint around with my brush. So with the same thick consistency, I just create all of the detail that I can see on the reference photo, and I paint in all of those little lines that I can see. but I don't take them to the bottom. We want to just darken this little section on that is in shadow on the painting, and again slowly building layers. I have a little bit more water on my brush now, because at the same time I'm also softening all of those lines that I put down earlier. These are all the colors that I used, just to make it easier for you to see. I still want to keep that little highlighted section light. This is my watercolor painting, use that as reference. I moved my palette to the right hand side. That's where I normally have my watercolor palette, but I kept it on the left hand side just so that I can have it in view to make it easier to share my palette. So now the consistency is very thick on my brush. The brush I use is a number 5 comb memory brush and has a nice point. I just want to lift out some of the paint with my brush. Again, mixing between those two colors, the nickel azo yellow with the yellow ochre. My paint is very thick on my palette. Just want to mix a little drop of Payne's Grey in there to create those darker little sections that we can see on the onion. And I go back all the time to check my colors, because watercolor dries lighter than what it does when you put it down. So I always go back and just darken the sections again. I look at my tonal values very carefully. I always print a dark photo, black and white photo, and a normal color photo. I always paint realistically in watercolor. Painting the tonal values on a watercolor painting is very important so that the painting doesn't look flat on the paper. So I focus on the tonal values, so the darkest of the sections of my painting, and from the lightest to the mid-tones of my painting. I just go back and forth and darken certain sections of the onion now that I see needs a little bit darker paint on it, and some sections might need a little bit more highlighted sections, so I might remove a little bit of paint, or I might add a little paint. This is the fun part of watercolor painting. This is my favorite part, where you create all of the detail that you can see on the reference photo. I just mix in a little bit more of the quinacridone gold deep, and I dropped in the pigment there because I just want the paint to do its work for me on this little section of the onion. Again, a lot of water on my brush just to soften all of those lines and to create a little bit more of a glaze. and I just use my brush to move the water and the paint around. So I just want to go with a little bit more of the Quinacridone Gold Deep on this section. I painted this onion before, and this is the second painting. And what I like is if you paint a subject twice, you know where you battled certain parts and which parts to focus on a bit more, and also where to change certain things that you weren't happy with previously. We're nearly done with this onion painting. What I do now is just go back and forth and add in a little bit more detail where I think I need to add or focus on certain parts a bit more. The consistency is thicker when I add in all of this detail, and then I just go back with my brush with clean water on and soften all of those little hard lines. I don't want it to be too dark. I hold my brush at an angle. It just helps me to add in all of the detail. I find that what helped me when I started to paint in watercolor, by painting fruit and vegetables and roses and certain flowers, just helped me to focus on the form, the tonal values and the shape, and to not overdo certain paintings. You have to know when to step away and to just walk away till the next day, and maybe come back the next day and look at your painting again. Sometimes we overwork our paintings, and that is also not a good idea. So rather leave your painting for the next day. If you're tired, come back. Sometimes I notice the next day that I can add maybe a little bit more detail on certain parts. It's better than overworking your painting. Or go and make yourself a nice cup of tea and come back in 10 or 15 minutes and have a look at your painting again. I would like to thank you for joining me while I was painting this onion in watercolor. And remember to always make time for yourself to paint. If you liked this video, I do have other tutorials that are full length, and I supply the line drawing and all the supplies that I use on my Patreon channel. Go and check it out. Thank you for watching. I will be back soon with another video.